My daughter-in-law slapped me in front of her entire family at my grandson's birthday party. But then my best friend stood up with the tablet in her hand and said one sentence that made the whole room go silent and drained the color from my daughter-in-law's face. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me to the end and tell me which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels." The sound of the slap cracked across the yard like a gunshot. A stinging burn flared on my cheek as I stumbled back, my hand flying up to cover the red mark spreading across my face. The dishes I had prepared with so much care still sat on the table, forgotten, while more than a dozen eyes drilled into me. Some looked shocked, others satisfied, but every last one stayed silent. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, stood tall, her hands still raised, her chest heaving with rage. "Don't you ever try to embarrass me again, you hear me?" She spat each word like poison. Her mother, Mrs. Patricia, smirked from her chair. Her sister Nicole barely glanced up from her iPhone, only to look at me like I deserved it. Then from a corner of the living room, a voice sliced the air, sharp enough to cut steel. "That's enough." Every head turned to my best friend Linda, standing by the window with a tablet clutched to her chest. Something in her blue eyes shifted the entire atmosphere. I watched Melissa's smug smile falter. "I've recorded everything you've done to Maggie for the last 43 days, Linda said, her tone even and unnervingly calm. "And right now, Daniel is going to see it all." The blood seemed to drain from Melissa's face. Her family exchanged confused glances, but in their expressions I saw something else beginning to flicker. Fear they didn't have a name for. "She's crazy," she shot back, but Linda looked at her the way a scientist studies a specimen. "I have video and audio of everything, weeks of it, and yesterday I sent all of it to Daniel." Linda tapped the screen. Immediately, Melissa's voice filled the air, crisp, cold, like a knife straight into my heart. "You're nothing but a freeloader, and the only reason you're still here is because I feel sorry for you." I had heard those words more times than I could count, yet hearing them out loud in front of everyone was like a blow that made me tremble. I felt the heat rush to my face, not from shame, but from the ache of a mother, a grandmother, trampled by her own family. A murmur rolled along the table. Guess who didn't know our history started whispering, "What's going on? Who's the freeloader?" I could hear them, but I didn't dare lift my head, afraid that if I met anyone's eyes, I wouldn't be able to hold back tears. Melissa had gone pale. She stepped forward and reached to snatch the tablet from Linda, but my friend was faster. "Back up," she said, her voice icy as winter. "It's already too late. I've sent everything to Daniel." At the sound of my son's name, my heart seemed to stop for a second. Daniel, my boy, the one I loved more than anything, for whom I had sacrificed my entire life, stationed far from home at Fort Bragg. I lifted my head, looked at Linda, then at Melissa. There was no arrogance left in Melissa's face, only panic. "Who's Daniel?" a curious guest asked. "Why did you send it to him?" another added. Linda softened her expression to reassure me, then looked squarely at Melissa. "He's Maggie's son and Melissa's husband, and he's on his way." The air around the table froze. The music kept playing in the distance, but no one seemed to hear it. Silence spread like frost, broken only by uncomfortable glances. Melissa looked around for support, from her mother, her sister, any guest at all. No one said a word. Patricia cleared her throat, trying to appear calm, but I saw her hand trembling around her wineglass. Nicole lowered her eyes and went back to her phone, as if she could scroll her way out of this reality. "The message from Daniel said to tell you that he is already on his way," Linda went on, her voice carrying the weight of an approaching storm. "That's when faces turn pale. That's when the beating began." 3 hours earlier, as the sun began to dip, laughter and cheerful chatter filled my backyard. It was my grandson Liam's 8th birthday, and the whole neighborhood seemed brighter with the party atmosphere. For me, though, this day was a test. I had been in the kitchen since dawn, making everything, from savory dishes to desserts. I wanted it all to be perfect, not for me, but for Liam, for his smile, and for my son, Daniel, even though he was far away. Melissa arrived in a striking red dress, a large Coach logo gleaming on her purse. She moved through the yard barking orders at the caterers, greeting guests warmly, and saying over and over, "Welcome to my home." Every time I heard it, my stomach twisted. I bought this house with years of working double shifts at the diner after my husband died. Every brick, every wall is my sweat and tears. But I said nothing. I kept working quietly, arranging the trays on the table, forcing a smile even as my heart grew heavy. Guests started to arrive, mostly Melissa's friends and relatives. They clustered in groups, laughing and chatting as if I were invisible beside the table. I tried to start conversations, to greet a few of them, but they barely responded before drifting away. I felt like a stranger in the house I had built with my own hands. I told myself, today is Liam's day. Be happy for him. Melissa led a group on a tour of the house, showing off every corner like the rightful owner. When they reached the kitchen, where I was carefully plating the cornbread, she stopped, pointed at me, and spoke loudly enough for all to hear. "This is where my mother-in-law spends all day because she has nothing else to do." Her tone was sweet, the words pierced like needles. There were snickers. I smiled stiffly, trying to hide the burning embarrassment. My hands trembled as I set the plate down. I said nothing, as if her words hadn't hit their mark, but they had. They stung so much I had to bite my lip not to cry. Linda arrived just as the party was getting underway. She wore a simple blue dress and a bright gaze that always told me she was there for me. I went out to welcome her, relieved to see a familiar face among so many strangers. "Linda, thank you for coming," I said, my voice a little shaky. Behind me, Melissa murmured loudly enough for me to hear, "Why does Mom invite these old ladies? And late on top of it. So embarrassing." I turned and caught her haughty look. Linda squeezed my hand, as if to say she'd heard, but she didn't react. She just smiled and helped me set the table on the patio. When it was time for gifts, I stood behind Liam, eyes full of hope. I'd spent all week choosing his present, a Lego train set I thought he would love. I wrapped it carefully and tied a red ribbon, imagining the radiant smile on his face. But when he ripped the paper and saw it, he scowled and tossed the box aside like it was worthless. "This is old. I want a PlayStation controller," he complained, his voice sharp with annoyance. The yard fell quiet for a beat. I felt a hand squeeze my heart. I leaned in, trying to keep my voice gentle. "Then next time, Grandma will get it for you." Liam shouted, "You don't even know what I like." The words cut deep. I stood there with my hand still on his head, the world slipping out from under my feet. I looked around and caught a few pitying glances, but no one spoke. Melissa stood there smiling like she was pleased with her son's reaction. The party went on. The music came back up, but in my chest, there was only emptiness. I retreated toward the back and kept busy so no one would see the tears building in my eyes. Later, when the party was in full swing, Melissa raised her wine glass, her eyes glittering in the lights. "I'm going to tell a funny story," she began. "The other day, my mother-in-law lost a whole envelope of family cash because she was careless. Luckily, I handled everything or we'd be ruined." Laughter exploded louder this time, like it really was a joke. A guest called out, "Does Daniel know about this?" Melissa answered sweetly, "Of course he does. He told me not to be too hard on his mom." I clenched the kitchen towel in my hands, feeling the blood boil. It wasn't true. I had combed the neighborhood under a pounding sun to recover money a delivery driver had dropped.
Melissa never told that part. She just wanted me to be the punchline. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, my voice shaking but steady. That's not true. Heads turned toward me in surprise. Melissa arched an eyebrow, and her smile turned cold. Then say it so everyone can hear. She said it with mocking sweetness. I took a breath, held my composure, and explained briefly. The delivery driver lost that money. I went and recovered it, every bill. The space went silent. I thought they might understand, that the truth would stop the laughter. But Melissa let out a dry laugh, stepped close, and hissed just for me, trying to embarrass me in front of my guests. Before I could react, the slap cracked. The yard went dead quiet. My cheek burned, but the pain in my heart was worse. I stumbled back, hand to face, drowning in humiliation and rage. Mrs. Patricia cackled as if the slap were hilarious. "Melissa, calm down. Don't make a scene," she said in a mocking tone. Nicole stayed glued to her phone. A relative muttered, "Melissa, I think you went too far." "She deserves it," Melissa snapped. No one dared come near. No one defended me. I stood there in the glowing garden, feeling myself sink into darkness. Tears pressed at my eyes, but I gritted my teeth to keep from crying. I looked over to Linda, standing in a corner with a gaze like fire. I knew she wouldn't let this go on another second.
My name is Margaret Carter, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm a 67-year-old widow living in a small house in Asheville, North Carolina, with my daughter-in-law Melissa and my grandson Liam. My son Daniel is stationed far from home at a dangerous base that squeezes my heart every time I think about it. This house, once the place where my husband and I built our dreams, now has only me left in it on most days, running the home for Daniel's family. I want to love Melissa like a daughter, but our eyes have never been warm to me. I cook for Liam, send packages to Daniel, and do all the chores, hoping to keep a little peace in this family. But every day, I feel more like a maid in the very house I raised with my sweat. Every morning, I get up at 4. The neighborhood sleeps under a light fog as I turn on the small burner and start breakfast for Melissa and Liam. The scent fills the kitchen, but my heart stays heavy. No matter how hard I try, I know there won't be a thank you. Melissa comes downstairs with the phone glued to her ear. She barely glances at the table and asks, flat and cold, "Where's the orange juice?" I hurry back to the kitchen, pour some in a glass, and set it next to her. No look, no thanks, just more sharp laughter into her call. Liam comes down with his hair mussed and sleep in his eyes. I smile and speak softly. "Eat before school. I made breakfast casserole, your favorite." He shoots me a sideways look, grabs a juice box, and walks out to the patio without a word. I stand there with a knife in my hand, cutting fresh fruit, feeling like a stone is crushing my chest. He's only 8, yet the way he looks at me carries his mother's stamp. I know Melissa has taught him how to treat me. Every time he is distant or rude, my heart cracks a little more. I wonder if I did something wrong, for even my own grandson to pull away. When Melissa and Liam leave, I start the chores. Melissa had already said, "Don't forget to wash the living room curtains today, and then polish the china set in the cabinet. I'll need it tomorrow." I nod, though my body aches at the thought. The curtains are heavy. I climb a chair, unhook each ring, soak them in soap. My hands shake with fatigue every time I lift them out of the water, but I keep going. By the time I finish rehanging them, the sun is high and sweat soaks my back. I sit on the step, exhale, and look at the small front garden. The white daisies I planted are still blooming, but they don't soothe the loneliness inside me. At noon, I head to the grocery store under North Carolina's brutal sun. I pick the freshest fish for dinner, thinking Melissa might like seafood chowder. On the way back, I stopped at a flower stand and buy a bouquet of white daisies to brighten the living room, hoping a little color will make the house feel less cold.
I set them carefully in an old ceramic vase in the center of the table. I look at the bouquet and smile, grateful I can still bring a bit of beauty into this home. That night, I put together a package for Daniel. Some homemade cookies I baked myself, a few packets of the coffee he likes, and a handwritten letter. I sat at the kitchen table, writing line by line about our quiet days at home, though they were anything but. I wrote, "Son, your mother is fine. Liam is growing fast. Please take care of your health." I didn't dare tell him how many times Melissa scolded me or how Liam looked at me with disdain. I only wanted Daniel to feel at ease while he was so far away. Just as I folded the letter, Melissa came into the kitchen, eyes cold. "What's that?" she asked suspiciously. "Some cookies for Daniel, so he won't miss home so much," I answered softly. She curled her lip. "Take some out. Shipping is expensive." Then she saw the letter in my hand, snatched it away and barked, "I told you, no letters to him." "It's just to say hello," I explained, my voice trembling. "I just want him to know Liam and I are okay." She didn't listen. She crumpled the letter and dropped it in the trash in front of me. I stood frozen, watching the paper fall, my heart splitting. That letter, just a few lines, was my way of feeling close to my son, of sending him a mother's love. But Melissa ripped it away the way she has ripped so much else from me. Right after that, Melissa FaceTimed Daniel. I stood behind the kitchen door listening to my boy's warm voice, the voice I miss with all my heart. "Babe, I made an amazing dinner," Melissa purred. "Look." She moved the camera around the table I had set so carefully, from the seafood chowder to the garden salad. I waved, hoping to speak to Daniel for even a minute, but Melissa cut me a sideways look full of contempt and hung up. "Don't butt into these calls," she said, voice like ice. "Let me handle it." I stood there with shaking hands, feeling like she had stripped me of the right to be a mother. Daniel is my blood, but Melissa has built a wall between my son and me. After dinner, Linda stopped by with a homemade pie and a warm smile. We sat and talked about Liam's upcoming birthday. "I'm thinking of baking a few more batches for the guests," I said, trying to sound cheerful. Linda's eyes seemed to read the pain I tried to hide. I just smiled and changed the subject so she wouldn't worry. When Melissa came out of the bathroom, she shot Linda a hostile look and went upstairs, slamming her door. I knew she had noticed everything. Linda squeezed my hand, telling me without words that she'd be there no matter what. One sweltering afternoon, sweat dripping from my forehead as I worked in the kitchen, Melissa invited 3 friends for coffee and dessert. I got up early and made her favorite, peach cobbler, and some fresh biscuits with honey butter. The sweet smell filled the little kitchen, but my heart found no relief. No matter how much I did, it would only be an excuse for Melissa to show off. I would be the silent shadow, as always. When I brought the dessert tray to the table, one of Melissa's friends, a young woman with shiny blonde hair, looked me over. "You never go out? Staying home all the time must be boring," she said with fake sympathy. I smiled, about to say that I liked caring for the family, but before I could answer, Melissa cut in indifferently. "She's used to it. She's always around the house, mostly in the kitchen." They all laughed, and those laughs felt like needles driven into my heart. Another woman added, "What a boring life, always in the kitchen." I stood there holding the tray, the wave of shame rising. I wanted to say something, to tell them I was once strong, that I raised my son alone after my husband died. But I stayed silent, retreating to the sink and pretending to be busy so I could hide my red eyes. Liam sat in the living room, glued to his iPad with the volume blaring. Now and then he shot me comments like knives. "You're taking too long with the drinks," he yelled when I brought the pitcher. Later, when I set a plate of biscuits in front of him, he wrinkled his nose. "Don't you know how to bake?" Melissa didn't stop him. She laughed and patted his soldier. Quick with the comeback, just like his mom. The laughter of Melissa and her friends mixed with Liam's games made me feel the whole world had turned its back on me. I stood at the counter, wringing the dish towel, holding back tears. Liam is my blood. Yet he looked at me like a stranger, parroting the harsh phrases his mother taught him. That night, when the house was quiet, I secretly called Daniel. Hearing my son's voice calmed something inside me. He said, "How are you, Mom?" Warm but tired. I told him about my day, how I baked for Melissa's friends, but left out the mockery and the words that cut me. He said, "Melissa takes good care of you." I said, "Yes, don't worry." I didn't want him stressing at the base over what was happening at home. But after I hung up, I sat in the dark, loneliness pressing on my chest. I had lied to my boy to protect him from the wounds I was enduring. A week later, Melissa brought her mother and sister for dinner. I prepared a perfect meal, hoping to ease the tension. Linda showed up with a jar of homemade apple butter. "Sister Maggie, I came to see you," she said with a comforting smile. I invited her to stay, though I immediately saw the uncomfort on Melissa's family's faces. They said nothing, but the way they looked at Linda told me she wasn't welcome. When we sat down, Melissa bragged loudly. "The house is clean because my mother-in-law cleans it. She has free time, so there's no need to hire anyone." Mrs. Patricia let out a mocking laugh. "Well, how nice. Saves you a good chunk of money, like a free housekeeper, right?" Nicole chuckled without ever looking up from her phone. Heat rose to my face, and I dropped my eyes to my plate. Under the table, I squeezed Linda's wrist, as if to say I was used to these comments, but I saw the deep frown on her face. I knew she wouldn't let this slide forever. She ate in silence, rage contained. After Melissa saw her family out, Linda stayed to help me clean. Alone in the kitchen, she asked quietly, "Do they always talk to you like that?" Her voice brimmed with concern. I smiled and changed the subject. "I'm used to it, Linda. Don't worry. Tomorrow I'll bake more cookies for Liam. He'll like it." Linda didn't answer. She just looked at me like she could see right through the lies I used to cover my pain. 2 days later, while I was chopping vegetables for chicken and dumplings, Melissa spotted a ceramic vase on the shelf, a wedding gift from my late husband and me, with a small crack I had accidentally made the day before. "Why are you always breaking things, Mom?" she snapped, eyes blazing. I started to explain, but before I could, she grabbed a glass from the table and hurled it to the floor. The smash echoed, shards flying everywhere. I froze, heart racing like a drum. "Melissa, I'm sorry, I'll replace the vase," I stammered, but she didn't listen. She shot me a look full of contempt and stomped upstairs. Just then, Linda came in with a bag of fresh peaches. She stopped at the kitchen door, staring at the glass shards glittering across the tiles. Melissa glanced at her, smiled coldly, and left me kneeling on the floor to pick up the pieces. Humiliation burned, but I didn't want Linda to see me weak. I tried to smile. "It's nothing, just a little accident." Linda said nothing. She grabbed the broom and knelt beside me, helping me sweep every shard. I felt like I was gathering up the broken pieces of my heart. That night, I lay staring at the ceiling. Melissa's words, her friend's laughter, her mother's jabs echoed in my head. I thought of Liam and the distance in his eyes. I thought of Daniel and all I'd hidden from him. I thought of myself, a mother, a grandmother who had spent her life loving her family, only to be wounded by them. Tears slid down my cheeks, and I didn't wipe them away. I just lay there in the dark, wondering if I would ever live without these hurts. Saturday morning, sunlight poured through the window as I wiped down the small kitchen table. I had just finished brewing a fresh pot of coffee when Melissa came downstairs, dressed and put together, her voice slicing the quiet. "My family's coming for dinner tonight. Prepare everything. No complaints." "How many?" I asked softly. 12, not counting the kids, she replied without looking up from her phone. I nodded. Heart heavy. A dinner that big meant a full day of work, but I didn't dare protest. I only wanted peace, so Daniel wouldn't worry while he was deployed. I hurried to the grocery store under North Carolina's punishing sun. The place buzzed with shoppers and staff. The scent of fresh produce and bakery items hung in the air. I chose tender beef, fresh chicken, and heaps of colorful vegetables and fruit for salad. I remembered the ingredients for peach cobbler, thinking, at least the children might enjoy it. I picked up fresh peaches for the cobbler. The bags weighed on my shoulders, my back ached, but I kept telling myself, I'm doing this for Liam, for the family. Though deep down I knew the guests wouldn't value my effort. Back at home, I dove into cooking. Delicious smells filled the kitchen, but no one noticed. Melissa busied herself in the living room, arranging tables and chairs, hanging string lights, and setting out decorative napkins. She stepped into the kitchen, gave me a quick once-over, and said, Hurry up, don't let the guests arrive to find things unfinished. I nodded and kept chopping. My phone buzzed. Linda. Sister Maggie, are you free tonight? I want to stop by. I replied quickly, I'm busy cooking for Melissa's family. If it's important, let's do it another day. I didn't want Linda to come. I worried that her presence would irritate Melissa. By dusk, guests poured in. Melissa greeted each one with hugs and kisses. Welcome to my home. Everything is in order because I've been cleaning since morning. I stood in the kitchen, those words ripping me up inside. This house, which I bought with sweat and tears after my husband died, and now Melissa claimed it as if I had nothing to do with it. I carried a tray of grilled chicken to the table, then kept serving sweet tea, filling wine glasses, walking back and forth like a server. No one invited me to sit. I stood off to the side with a tight smile, trying to turn invisible so no one would notice how out of place I felt. At the head of the table, Mrs. Patricia's voice boomed with pride. Now that's a good mother-in-law, knows her place. A relative, maybe a cousin of Melissa's, snickered. She probably never goes out, so that's why she has nothing to think about the cooking. A proper old-fashioned woman, huh? Laughter sliced straight into my heart. I heard it all but kept smiling as I set down a platter of green bean casserole with shaking hands. Alone in the kitchen, I could still hear them. Jokes with my name in them, barbed comments. I bet Maggie only knows how to cook. This house is this clean thanks to Melissa. Maggie doesn't do anything, another voice added. I bit my lip and held back tears, feeling myself shatter into 1,000 pieces. I'd devoted my life to caring for the family, and now they were my punchline. Near the end of dinner, Linda appeared with a basket of fresh apples. Sister Maggie, she said kindly, I brought you some apples. I was happy to see her, but worried Melissa would be upset. Linda sat in a corner of the kitchen, taking everything in. I watched her frown deepen when laughter erupted in the living room at yet another joke about me. Liam sat next to his mother and sometimes burst out laughing when the adults mocked me. When I served the peach cobbler, Liam looked at it and made a face. My mom makes this better. Yours tastes awful. The words hit like ice water. Melissa nodded without correcting him, even laughed as if agreeing. I looked at Liam, hoping he'd take it back, but he turned away and kept eating. Linda gave me a look full of compassion, but she said nothing, just kept watching, committing every detail to memory. After the guests left, Melissa carried a stack of dirty dishes into the kitchen and dropped them in front of me. Wash these. Don't leave them lying around, she ordered. Then, turning to Linda, who stood beside me, she bragged, Don't worry, I take very good care of my mother-in-law. Linda simply nodded, but I saw a blade-cold look in her eyes. I started washing. Water poured over my hands as I felt myself sinking. I was exhausted, not only from the day's work, but from the contempt that had crushed my spirit. When we were alone, Linda took my hand and said in a grave voice, Sister Maggie, you don't deserve to be treated like this. I gave a weak smile and shook my head. I'm used to it, Linda. Don't worry. As long as Liam is happy and Daniel has peace of mind, I can endure. Linda didn't let go. She looked straight into my eyes. You can't keep enduring. You're Daniel's mother. You're Liam's grandmother. You deserve respect. I said nothing, just bowed my head and kept washing. But her words were a spark, lighting the faintest hope inside me. The next morning, we met at a small cafe downtown. The smell of freshly roasted coffee couldn't ease the weight on my chest from the night before. The mocking, the slap, Liam's distant gaze. Linda's eyes were steady as she got right to the point. Maggie, I want to help you. From now on, I'm going to record what happens in your home. She pulled a small black recorder from her bag and set it on the table. Just put it in a discreet place. It'll capture everything, she explained, voice firm and decided.
I looked at the device, hesitant. Linda, is this right? What if Melissa finds out? She cut me off, more serious than ever. I'm your friend. I can't watch this happen. If someone like me, an outsider, feels outraged, do you think Daniel would want his family broken like this? At Daniel's name, my heart clenched. I thought of the letters, the packages I sent so he could feel some warmth of home. I thought of all the times I stayed quiet to keep him from worrying while he was stationed so far away. Linda looked straight into me, as if she could see the hurt I hid. You've done nothing wrong, Maggie, but if you keep silent, it will only get worse. I gripped my cold coffee cup and finally nodded, my voice barely a whisper. Okay, I'll do it. Linda smiled, squeezed my hand, and I felt some strength pass from her into me. That afternoon, after Melissa and Liam went out, I tucked the recorder into a flower vase in the living room, hidden behind white daisy stems. My hands shook as I did it, like I was committing a crime. But deep down, I knew it was the only way to bring the truth into the light. That night, as I prepared dough for cornbread, Melissa walked in with a scowl. Are you deaf or what? I told you to buy a different brand of flour. No one's going to eat this, she snapped. I tried to explain the store didn't have the one she wanted, but she didn't give me the chance and stormed off. I stood there with the bag in my hands, humiliation rising. Then I remembered the recorder in the living room. It had captured every word. A tiny spark of hope flickered. A few days later, I called Daniel in secret while Melissa was shopping. I'd tried to sound cheerful, but we didn't get to talk long. Melissa came back suddenly, ripped the phone from my hands, and said coldly, "He is busy. Stop calling." I froze, watching her end the call. Pain sharp in my chest. Daniel was my only comfort, and Melissa had taken that too. I wanted to scream that I had a right to speak to my son, but I just bowed my head and went back to the kitchen. I knew the recorder had captured that moment as well. Another afternoon, a letter arrived from Daniel, sent through the military mail. I hugged it, ready to read, but Melissa saw it, yanked it from me, skimmed it, and tore it up in my face. "You don't need to read these things," she said, crumpling the pieces and tossing them. I stood there, heart clenched, watching the scraps fall. That letter, his words of love, the one thing that helped me through the worst days, she destroyed it like she had destroyed my dignity. When she left, I knelt and gathered every piece, tears streaming, and took photos of the fragments to send to Linda. This is what I'm living. Once, while I was carrying a pot of hot soup to the table, Melissa bumped me on purpose so it spilled all over the floor. "You're as clumsy as a child," she sneered. I knelt to clean, hiding my pain, but I knew the hidden camera Linda had installed above the kitchen cabinet on her last visit had recorded everything. That scene, along with every insult and shove, became a daily log of the wounds I carried. Linda and I fell into a secret routine. Each time she visited, she made a discreet round, checked the recorders and camera, changed batteries, collected the files. I kept doing what I always did, cooking elaborate meals for Melissa and Liam, cleaning the house, watering the plants, even buying Melissa new clothes and Liam new toys. I didn't do it for Melissa. I did it for Daniel, for Liam, for the hope that someday our family might feel like a family again. But every time Liam repeated his mother's harsh lines, "Mom says you can't come into my room," I wilted. He was only 8, already learning to see me as a stranger.
One night, while Melissa was out partying with friends, Linda came over with her laptop. She sat beside me and opened a folder full of videos, audio files, photos, everything she'd collected for the past month. I watched in silence as Melissa's insults played one after another. In a video, she deliberately spilled soup and then yelled at me in front of Liam. In a recording, I heard Liam's little voice, "Mom says you only know how to cook, that you can't do anything right." I bowed my head, tears dripping onto my hands. Linda set a hand on my shoulder. "You need this, Maggie, so when the time comes, no one can call you a confused old woman." I looked at her with gratitude and fear. I was terrified that if Daniel learned the truth, the family would fall apart. But I also knew I couldn't keep living under this humiliation. Each recording was a piece of the truth I had tried to hide, and with Linda's help, I could finally see a way out of the dark. That night in bed, I thought of Daniel, of all the years I had sacrificed. Tears came again. But this time, there was a thin thread of hope.
Maybe the truth would help me reclaim what I'd lost, even if the road ahead was hard. Back at the party, after Linda announced to everyone that she had sent the evidence to Daniel, the country music still thumped from the speakers, but no one heard the beat. Silence stretched tight, eyes darted. Liam clung to his mother, confusion clouding his face, stuck between us. My heart clenched, looking into his eyes, a child caught on the fault line of adults. I was about to stand and collect dirty plates, my way of hiding my pain, when the screech of a car braking hard outside made me freeze. The front door flew open and Daniel walked in. Not the boy I remembered, the man my son had become, still in uniform, dust from the road clinging to him. He swept into the room like a wind that cleared the suffocating air. Behind him came two colleagues, badges on their chests, Lieutenant Harris and Legal Officer Thompson. I stood frozen, a tray of dishes in my arms, staring at my son. He stopped in the middle of the room, took in the garden, then fixed his gaze on me. He saw the red mark on my cheek, the print of Melissa's hand, and his face darkened. He looked straight at her and said, voice cold and sharp as a blade, "Explain yourself." Melissa, suddenly nervous in her red party dress, forced a smile and tried to glide toward him. "Honey, they're misunderstanding everything. Your mom is just exaggerating." Daniel raised a hand, stopping her with his eyes. "I've seen everything." The words fell like a hammer. The smile slid off her lips. Liam ran to clutch his mother, avoiding my gaze like I was a stranger. I wanted to open my arms, to tell him it would be okay, but I couldn't. The ache in my chest was a riptide. Lieutenant Harris stepped forward and laid a thick stack of documents on the table. "This is what we received from Miss Linda," he said. Photos pulled from videos, audio transcripts, and a still of the torn letter I had photographed. Everything was there. The TV in the patio corner flicked on, and a compilation video Linda had prepared began to play. Melissa's voice, cold as ice, "You're nothing but a freeloader." Then the clip of her deliberately knocking over the soup, the smirk afterward while I knelt to clean. Murmurs rippled among the guests. Some of Melissa's relatives, including her mother, turned pale. Nicole stared down at her phone like she wanted to tunnel out of reality. Officer Thompson stepped forward, voice calm and authoritative. "With this evidence, we have sufficient grounds to request an immediate restraining order to ensure Miss Margaret Carter is safe from further threats or harm." The words landed like a sentence. The tension tightened even more. Melissa looked around for support among family and friends. Mrs. Patricia stammered, trying to stand up. "Surely this is a misunderstanding. Melissa didn't mean—" Daniel cut her off, voice ice cold. "Get out of this house, now." He pointed to the door without a shred of hesitation. "This is my house," Melissa snapped. "This is my mother's house," Daniel replied, firm and grave. "I trusted you to take care of her while I was gone. That won't be necessary anymore." The final cut of a knife,
Melissa's arguments died on her lips. She stood there, pale, all arrogance gone. Liam, still clutching his mother, cried out, "I'm not staying with her. I want to go with my mom." His voice was high and piercing. It shattered me. I wanted to run to him, to say how much I loved him, but he wouldn't look at me. My hand shook. The world tilted. Beside me, Linda set a gentle hand on my shoulder, a quiet sign of comfort. "It's over, Maggie," she whispered, soft but strong. I looked at her with tears threatening, but I held them back. I didn't want to seem weak. I didn't want Melissa to think she had won. Deep inside, though, I felt something uncoil. The truth was out, and my son had stood up for me. That small ray of light eased some of the pain I had carried for years. Unable to accept defeat, Melissa hurled her wineglass to the ceramic floor. The crash rang out like a last declaration of fury. She spun on her heel and rushed upstairs, dragging Liam. I heard a door slam, frantic footsteps, and the small, muffled sobs of a child. The music had stopped. Only the wind whispering through the white daisies in the yard seemed to move. Upstairs, Melissa's voice rose and fell on one phone call after another, sliced with insults. "You think I'm just going to stand by?" she shouted, cold and trembling under the panic. I stood there holding a stack of dirty plates, feeling the world tilt again. The insults, the slaps, the contempt, suddenly they felt like a bad dream lifting. The wounds in my heart still ached, though. Downstairs, guests began to slip out. Faces that had laughed at me now turned down, hurrying past without meeting my eyes. Some of Melissa's relatives, those who had thrown fuel on the fire, left in silence. At the door, Mrs. Patricia reached for Daniel's arm. "Son, forgive her this time," she pleaded, eyes red. "Melissa just has a strong personality. She didn't mean—" Daniel cut her off, voice firm, but pained. 3 years is more than enough. She crossed the line, not once, but many times. I looked at my son and saw hurt and resolve. The boy I had raised with all my heart now stood tall to defend me. Warmth and pain bloomed together inside me. A moment later, heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. Melissa appeared with a large suitcase, eyes red, pride still stamped across her face. She stopped in the middle of the room and glared at Daniel and me. "You'll regret this," she hissed. She pulled Liam close and declared, "I will never let the boy live with you." The words stabbed through me. I looked at Liam, confusion and fear in his eyes, but he clung to his mother like I was a stranger. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to tell him I loved him, but I couldn't move. My hand shook as if someone had just torn out part of my heart. Daniel opened the door and signaled to Lieutenant Harris to escort Melissa out. Officer Thompson stepped over to me and handed me a copy of the temporary restraining order. "Miss Carter, this is a protective order. Melissa cannot come near you during this period. If she violates it, call us immediately," he said, explaining my rights and the time frame. I barely heard him. My mind was blank, except for the image of Liam clinging to his mother, an invisible reproach in his eyes. When Melissa disappeared through the gate, hauling her suitcase and taking Liam, I let out a long breath, as if I just walked out of a narrow cell. The pain still throbbed, sharp and persistent. I wanted to call out Liam's name, but I knew the only voice he would hear right then was his mother's. When the house finally fell quiet, I looked around the yard, the trays of food I had prepared with such care, the white daisy branches lying still in the dim light. No more fake laughter, no more barbed words. The home I had built with tears and effort seemed to regain the peace it always deserved. But with that peace came a hollowness. I thought of Liam's distant eyes and wondered whether I would ever hold him like before. Linda stood at my side and smiled softly. "From now on, you decide who gets to walk into your life, Maggie." Her words were a cool breeze across the raw places in my heart. I nodded, saying nothing, full of gratitude for the friend who had stood with me in my darkest days. That night, I slept deeply for the first time in years. No footsteps, no scolding, no contemptuous stares. But when I closed my eyes, I still saw Liam holding his mother's hand, walking away from this house. I knew that even though the truth was out and Daniel had stood up for me, the pain of losing my connection with my grandson would haunt me for a while. I had devoted my life to loving my family, to caring for Liam as if he were my own child, and now he looked at me like a stranger. I lay in the dark feeling the emptiness, but also the faint hope that someday I might win back Liam's love.
In the days after Melissa left, I still wasn't used to the silence. Her hurried steps, her cold scolding, Liam's distant gaze, all seemed to echo. But there was no time to drown in those memories. Daniel had contacted a respected family law attorney in Asheville, Robert Martinez. "Mom, we need to end this once and for all," Daniel said, his voice heavy with regret for letting me suffer so long. I nodded, heart heavy. I didn't want court. I didn't want to face Melissa in public. But I knew it was the only way to protect myself and try to reclaim what I'd lost. Linda came one sunny morning with a small box, videos, recordings, photos, and a detailed report she had written herself. "Maggie, here's everything," she said firmly. "Robert will use this to make sure Melissa can't deny any of it." I looked at the box. Gratitude and fear tangle inside me. Those files were proof of the days I'd been humiliated and a reminder of wounds still unhealed. I took Linda's hand. "Thank you. Without you, I don't know how I would have made it." A week later, the court set a date for the preliminary hearing. Daniel squeezed my hand. "Mom, I won't let you face her alone. I'm here," he said, a small flame warming my cold heart. I tried to smile, still scared of what would happen, in front of Melissa, her family, everyone. Would they believe me or keep calling me a confused old woman, like Melissa did? On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was full. I sat in the front row with Daniel, Linda, Robert, and 2 of Daniel's colleagues, who had witnessed the moment the truth came out at Liam's party. Across the aisle, Melissa sat with her mother and sister. She wore a simple black dress. The arrogance was gone from her face, but her eyes were still cold, defiant. Robert rose, his voice resonant. "Your Honor, we are here to defend Miss Margaret Carter, who has suffered severe psychological abuse at the hands of her daughter-in-law, Miss Melissa Tran." He began by playing the video from Liam's birthday. The sound of Melissa's slap filled the room, faces frozen in shock on the screen. I dropped my gaze, transported back to that painful moment. Robert continued with recordings of Melissa's insults. "You're just a freeloader. You're as clumsy as a child," each one cutting me anew. Then he played the video of Melissa ripping up Daniel's letter and tossing it into the trash. When Robert read aloud the letter's content, my son's loving words, the courtroom felt utterly silent. I bowed my head, tears spilling, clutching the handkerchief Linda had pressed into my hand. She squeezed my fingers under the table, telling me I wasn't alone. Melissa's lawyer stood and tried to minimize it all. "Your Honor, this is a normal family conflict. These actions do not rise to the level of abuse." Linda took the stand. Her voice was clear and steady. I watched Melissa's behavior repeat for months. She didn't just insult Miss Margaret Carter, she deliberately isolated her from her son and grandson. This is not ordinary conflict. It is systematic psychological abuse. Her words blew away the last of the doubt hanging in the room. Daniel spoke briefly but with steel in his voice. "I'm Miss Margaret Carter's son. I trusted my wife to care for my mother while I was away. The evidence make forgiveness impossible. I won't put my mother's life and dignity in the hands of someone who despises and harms her." After reviewing the evidence, the judge announced the ruling. Melissa was prohibited from approaching me for 5 years. She had to return any property or money she had taken from the Carter family and pay damages for emotional harm.
Melissa went rigid, her face whitening as if she couldn't believe what she had heard. Patricia grabbed her daughter's arm and tried to hustle her out amid the murmurs. Nicole followed with her head down. I sat breathing deeply, feeling the weight I'd carried for so many years finally lighten. Outside the courthouse, Asheville's soft light wrapped around us. Daniel took my hand. "Mom, from now on, you won't have to endure this." I nodded and managed a small smile, though my heart still ached for Liam.
A few months later, Daniel finalized his divorce from Melissa. The court granted Liam's custody to Melissa. I didn't interfere. I respected the law, but I couldn't help the sadness. Liam is my grandson, my blood, but I couldn't see him or hold him. Every night I lay in bed thinking of his smile, the way he used to cling to me, and the tears came back. A month after the ruling, I left the house in Asheville, a place dense with painful memories. I moved to a tiny place by the sea in Wilmington, NC, not far from the mountains. 2 rooms, a small garden full of red roses, and a wooden porch that faced the water. Every morning at dawn, I sat on the porch listening to the waves, feeling the weight inside me slowly dissolve. I had spent too much time living inside pain, inside Melissa's mockery and slaps. Now I wanted peace, even if I had to find it inch by inch. In the mornings, I walked lightly on the sand, bare feet in the cool shore. Then I brewed a cup of coffee and sat with a book Linda had given me, Poems by Maya Angelou. The verses, soft as the sea breeze, helped me forget the days of hurt. I read slowly, letting each word soak in, like it was healing invisible scars. Some days I sat for hours, watching the sea and thinking of Daniel and Liam. I wondered if I would ever hold Liam again, or if he would always live under the shadow of his mother's cruel words. I joined a group of local women who cooked to raise funds for poor children. Each week in the small community center kitchen, we made fried chicken, cornbread, or peach cobbler and sold them at the farmer's market. I found joy in using my cooking to help others. The women there, with their sincere smiles and everyday stories, made me feel like I belonged somewhere. "Maggie, yours is the best cobbler in the county," Rosa teased after a bite. I smiled, warmth blooming in my chest, feeling I was getting back a part of myself that Melissa had tried to destroy. Daniel visited on weekends, sometimes bringing fresh seafood, sometimes the cookies he and his mother loved. We sat on the porch and ate, and he told me about the base. "Mom, the other day I saw a flock of migratory birds flying over the post," he said, eyes bright. "They formed a V. It was beautiful." I saw strength and tenderness in his gaze and told him, "You're like your father. You always find beauty in small things." Moments like that, simple as they were medicine to my heart. Daniel took my hand. "Mom, I just want you to be happy," he said. I nodded, tears threatening, but this time they were tears of gratitude. Linda visited often, sometimes staying the night. We watched old movies, laughed, and talked late. One night, moonlight painting the sea silver, she looked at me and said, "See, Maggie, you're stronger than you think. You've survived everything." I smiled, but my heart still tightened when I thought of Liam, the missing piece I didn't know if I'd ever get back. A year later, Linda brought chilling news. "Maggie, I heard at the grocery store that Melissa sent Liam to a boarding school," she said, worried. "She can't take care of him anymore." I went silent, gripping my coffee cup. Linda added that Melissa was living in difficult circumstances, moving from place to place for lack of money and without a degree to get stable work. I felt no satisfaction, only a diffuse sadness. Melissa had been my daughter-in-law, part of my family. What she did broke everything. I thought of Liam, how hard it must be to live away from his mother, and my heart cinched tight. "I have to bring Liam home," I said, determined. "I'll help," Linda replied. That Saturday, Daniel and I went to the boarding school. We found Liam sitting in a corner, thinner, wary.
I opened my arms and called softly, "Liam, it's Grandma." He looked up, hesitated, then ran into my arms. I held him tight, tears rolling down my cheeks. "I've missed you so much," I whispered, stroking his messy hair. On the drive home, Liam curled up against me and murmured, "I'm sorry, Grandma. I said mean things before because Mom told me to." I laid my hand on his head and answered gently, "The past is behind us, Lamb. What matters is that you're here now." His words were a balm on wounds I thought would never heal. At home, Daniel, Liam, and I shared our first meal together in years. I made breakfast casserole, Liam's favorite. Watching him smile and eat with gusto filled my heart to the brim. From then on, Liam lived with me. Time at the boarding school had changed him. He was respectful, cheerful, always ready to help around the house. One day, I saw him watering the plants, humming a tune I'd taught him. "Grandma, this one grew so fast," he said, beaming. I looked at him, overflowing with happiness, as if the sad days were far behind us. One evening, with the sun sinking red over the sea, I took Liam to the beach. He ran ahead, jumping and laughing, while I walked slowly behind, watching the golden light spill across the sand. For the first time in years, I didn't think about old wounds, Melissa's insults, or Liam's distant eyes. My heart felt light, like a bird finally released from its cage. I took Liam's hand, watched his smile, and knew with certainty this was the family I had always dreamed of. The days of pain were behind us, and I had found happiness at last. Little by little, in the small house by the sea, we began again. This story is fictional, though inspired by real events. Names and places have been changed to protect the people involved. We don't share it to judge anyone, but in the hope that someone listening will stop and think, how many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? If you were in my place, what would you do? Stay quiet to keep the peace? Or find the courage to fight for your voice? I truly want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I believe with all my heart that courage leads us to better days. On the final screen, you'll find 2 of this channel's most beloved stories. I promise they'll surprise you. Thank you for staying with me to the end.